Well, welcome friends to this consultation, this roundtable on experiential, spiritual exploration and deepening online. I have started the recording now, and I'm glad to see you, and I'm pleased we have such an intimate group because that'll enable some great conversation, I think. So my work among friends has been mostly leading workshops, teaching classes about Quakerism and Quaker spirituality, including as a residential Quaker studies teacher at Pendle Hill for several years. And the emphasis in my leading has always been on helping people to actually connect with the spirit in the deepest possible way. And I found that that requires a lot of emphasis on actually doing experiential exploration and on intimate spiritual sharing. And a lot of what I do is actually teaching people how to serve as spiritual companions to one another, because we have enormous gifts for helping each other. And those gifts are often not realized when we're in large group discussions or even in worship sharing. And so that's what I wanted to share. Of course, online only is difficult in many ways. There are many beautiful things about being in person that are more difficult online, including meeting for worship. And, you know, it retreats those informal connections that people make over meals and so forth are lost online to some extent. And, but I think there are also some really beautiful possibilities that I've experienced during this year of pandemic, of ways that we can help each other really go deep in an experiential way. And I'd love to share a little bit about my experience. And I'd love to hear about your experiences of that, what's worked for you. But partly as a way of modeling, for just a few minutes, I wanted to try something sort of to help us get in touch with our own experiences in a way that I might facilitate as kind of a modeling, but also to begin us for our sharing for this roundtable. So one of the things I do is I invite people to notice the difference between the speaking that comes primarily from your head and the speaking that comes from paying attention to the wisdom in your heart or in that center of your body that's connected with your bodily awareness, your inner senses. It's called the heart, but it's really the center of your body there. So one of my favorite exercises to have people do in pairs is to talk about the difference between sort of responding from your head and listening to your heart and responding from there. And then invite them in pairs to ask a repeating question and to answer from the heart. And one of my favorite questions for that is, when do you experience the spirit? So one person is the questioner for a certain number of minutes, like 4 minutes or 5 minutes, and we'll ask the same question over and over again in a really gentle rhythm. It's like, when do you experience the spirit? And the one who's responding will go to their heart each time to see, what does your heart have to say about that? I experience the spirit when someone is giving me loving attention. And the questioner will say, thank you, whatever the answer is. And there'll be a pause, and then the listener will ask the question again, when do you experience the spirit? And it's an invitation to see again got a thing, and I may not have been the one to respond to that. Anyway, the opportunity is to see again freshly, what does your heart have to say to that? So it's like, oh, when I'm in the sunshine on a warm day in a beautiful place, my heart opens and I experience the spirit. Thank you. Oftentimes, the answers that come from our heart have fewer words than the answers that come from our head. They usually don't have as much story. So that's one of my favorite exercises. But right now, I'd just like to invite each of us to pay attention to our heart. Close your eyes, pay attention to your heart. Think about your experiences online this year, and what experiences, spiritual deepening experiences, have really touched you at the heart level. So take a deep breath. And I would just invite anybody who wants to share about spiritual deepening, or spiritual exploration experiences online that have really touched you or moved you at the heart level.
When you ask that question, I go to specific moments. It's hard to put my finger on what the commonality is. It has something to do with being with others, recognizing and acknowledging how hard it is, but then either naming or feeling spirit in the now anyway. It's like, it's not just the experience of that in person, but through this year, there's both the combo of the loss and then the deep gratitude when it still happens. And I think that's why I can almost name them.
Mm-hmm.
And they can still almost make me cry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Member of a very small, tiny meeting. We have not been meeting either in person or online, and instead have been going once a week to our quarterly meeting. And I have never felt very connected to my local meeting, especially as it's shrunk over the years. And now I feel connected to my quarterly meeting for worship. It's been a wonderful experience. And we just started doing worship sharing once a month. And this past Sunday was about how your faith has changed in your life. And oh my gosh, it was so easy to listen. And I was so amazed at watching the other people and we did it as the total group. So there are about 12 of us. I keep saying, well, maybe we could do breakout rooms, but we're not ready. We don't know each other that well, since most of the people I've never met in person. And it was just such a great experience. It's sort of a little bit like telling your spiritual journey. So it was just a little slice. And I was just so touched and just thrilled that this was happening. And I was sitting at home while it was happening, and I wanted to keep happening. in this way. So.
Wonderful, thank you.
Well, I would identify with parts of what has already been said, in that the only common thread that I can ever identify from my spiritual experiences is a sense of presence beyond me. And then a need to be open to whatever is coming through in that experience. And this year, we had a wonderful worship sharing session in committee, in ministry and worship, where we talked about the physical place in our worship experience. Because we were hearing a lot from people about how they felt like they couldn't really get in touch with the spirit anywhere but in the meeting house. And the committee was wrestling with what that actually meant, and having trouble identifying with it. So we worship shared in the committee about that. One of the things I have tried on Zoom that has been really helpful for me to center and have a better worship experience is that I bring up my, not me, but my standard picture, which is a white dove right now. And I go to another part of the room and I sit down in a chair, and when there's a message, it just washes over me the same way it would in the meeting house. And so rather than me sitting there focusing on this picture talking on the screen, I find myself just immersing in the message and just being surrounded and engulfed by it. And I find that's been very helpful to me.
Beautiful, thank you. So one thing I'm hearing from all of these is your heart gets touched when you're listening to the spirit, or you're inviting people to speak about the spiritual journey, or you're inviting people to speak about challenges, difficulties, things that really affect the heart. And that, Lynn, I also heard you say about the worship sharing, you know, this is a group that's not ready for small groups yet. It's, you know, it's still forming. We're still getting to know each other. It's important to be together as a whole group. That's really important to get a sense of when is it a good time to be in smaller groups. Or a lot of the things that I do online involve a lot of pair work and small groups, really small groups, like groups of 3 or 4. And that's also true of my in-person teaching and workshop facilitation. And that's partly because I grew up very, very shy and finding it really hard to find my way into a conversation because other people just didn't leave a big enough gap for me to feel ready. And I was one of those people, I had to sort of like rehearse what I was going to say before I could speak. And, you know, so that keeps changing as the conversation keeps moving. So I have been really careful in my facilitation to create opportunities that really invite everybody to have, if not equal, pretty, you know, a good amount of space to speak, both to hear another person and to hear themselves speak. So pairs are really, when you put people in a pair, then everybody's listening half the time and speaking half the time. And when you're in a large group, almost everybody's listening most of the time. And so that's really valuable to bond the group, to have these large group conversations and sharings. But it's also really important to give people opportunities in pairs and really small groups to share. And then sort of the next step in the work that I've been doing is to create ways of listening and to teach ways of listening and then evoking sort of more from the person they're listening to as a deeper kind of listening. So that question of when do you experience the spirit? Listening for the answer, thanking, and then asking again. Even though there's no feedback on what they're hearing, there is a listener that's really engaged, it's really listening. And that can really allow someone to open their heart and speak from a heart in ways that they rarely do. Usually when people come back from the exercise, there's some people who've been in tears and some people who are like beaming because they have felt heard. And I know when I do it, my heart often says things I haven't really paid attention to before. So it's like somebody else listening gives you permission or the structure to listen. So I've also been interested in other ways of structuring those conversations, either in pairs or in small groups, so that the way that the person listens can evoke the next step. It's like, okay, I've heard you, and from that, I want to ask a quick question to draw out more. And when someone asks you a good question about what you've just said, it makes you feel heard, it makes it feel safe to say the next thing, and people begin to reveal more. This year, the pandemic, I actually took an online course in which I was paired with another person for 16 weeks. We were supposed to meet once a week for an hour or an hour and a half. Sometimes we even took 2 hours. And it was very structured exercises that they gave us, do this, 10 minutes doing this, 20 minutes doing this, and so forth. And it really, the structured sharing and the queries that we were about sharing and the opportunities for sharing really helped us go really deep together. We continued for another 16 weeks together, and then we both left the course and are continuing. This is someone in California I never would have met if it hadn't been through this online thing. And a similar thing happened for me with another woman in North Carolina. So the online has really allowed people to find, a sort of a kindred spirit. And but it's also the opportunities to some kind of structure, at least to start with, that allows that deepening experience. And I can share more about some of the exercises I do, but I just want to see if anyone else has some comments at this point.
I was in a Pendle Hill course and partnered up a few times with someone and thought, this is someone I want to talk to more. And so since then, it's been probably 6 months now. We meet every other week. And we don't have a structure, but I never really thought about the evoking question. But last time we met, I just said to her, I said, this is spirit speaking, because we talk after someone's, one of us has said a major thing, and it's like, and we get so much out of the other person and what they're observing. And but I really want to introduce the question, to sort of go deeper. But it just, and we're both so appreciative, and we just seem like, wow, we're just the right person. We have the right person with us for this. And it's like, it's just so amazing when I realized, oh, this is spirit coming and being speaking through us. So I've gotten so much out of it. It's just been really wonderful. So
Wonderful. Thank you. Suzanne, I see you put something in the chat. Your internet service froze a little bit. almost bounced from the meeting. So if you suddenly disappear, it's not a comment on the discussion. Thanks for letting us know.
Just want people to know, because all of a sudden, I'll freeze in some grotesque, posture, and then I'll be gone. And I don't want people to think that, that I'm not enjoying the conversation. I really am.
Great. Thank you for letting us know. And I hope you do stay with us.
I do too, but I noticed it when it happened, and I thought, oh, we're doing this again.
Any other comments or sharing?
I'm a small group person. I really, really like 6 or fewer. 2's great, because you really can get into deep conversations. And you can get into really heartfelt spiritual conversations. I've led the newcomers group in our meeting for over 20 years. And we start off by talking about our spirituality, about our experiences of God. That's the first question, is talk about your experience of God. And it bonds the group in an amazing way. And it gives people tolerance for the spiritual differences that we have in our groups, because it's a safe environment for the newcomers to have that conversation. And I just always sit there and wish that we could just do that meeting wide. That we could mix up the big group, and pair them off, or, put them in little pockets and say, sit down and talk about your experience of God with each other, and see what happens. But I do think that our committees do a lot of that, interestingly, without necessarily asking the query. The fact of people being in a small, safe group, they start talking to each other in a different way.
Yeah. And
I'm part of first-time attenders for the gathering, and so I was real interested in what you said, Suzanne, about being part of a newcomer, or being in this newcomer group or leading it, because we're getting ready to, put something together for this year. So, and I love the idea of telling a spiritual kind of story. But last year we didn't have much time to prepare. So and certainly ideas that I get here would be good. I'd rather go to the spiritual rather than the funny kind of stuff. We have an hour to do this presentation, so I don't want to know what your pet's name is unless it fits something we're doing. So anyway, that's.
Well, and we mustn't forget who we are. We are the Religious Society of France.
Yeah.
And, I'd like to start there. My material starts there, for one thing. The material I use, it's not mine. And then build to the structure, and build to the committees, and build to the process. Because frankly, that's how all religions work. They start with that spiritual component. And that's where sometimes it breaks down, because people think everybody should agree with everybody about what they believe. And so if you can get people to a point where they hear there's all these different ways of connecting to God, there's a tolerance and an acceptance that gets built.
thank you, and welcome to Deb.
Yeah.
Thank you. I couldn't find my way back in after lunch. Needed some help.
Well, I'm glad you made it. So we're talking about ways of sharing that are spiritually deepening. Gretchen, did you have something to add?
I could add many things. I think my one thing would be, I usually start out groups by inviting people after a bit of worship to just say aloud the words that they use for that of God, the divine, whatever it is, and then having all of those words be there in between us all as a way of kind of bringing that into all of us, but also being able to step into us honoring each other's words.
Mhm.
And that in and of itself almost always takes things deeper a notch.
Well, one of the things I teach often when I facilitate groups is talking about evoking questions, and particularly questions that get to people's spiritual experience, get to their spiritual senses, get to the images or passages of scripture or poetry that guide them, helping them to sort of let go of the analytical thinking that most of us do most of the time, and pay attention to the other kinds of knowing and our intuition and our inner senses, our spiritual senses. These are the questions that we often ask in a clearness committee meeting, or that we might ask each other in a spiritual friendship, or that you've been asking each other in some of the groups you're talking about, questions about our experiences of God, spirit. What are the names that we use for that? What is our faith? What are our spiritual beliefs? But these questions can help each other pay attention to those subtle things from the spirit that we're experiencing that our culture teaches us to disregard or not pay much attention to. And because they're often really subtle or humble things, it's easy to push them aside unless someone is inviting us to look at them, talk about them, if somebody's valuing them, if we give them the context in which they can share those things. So one of the things I like to do is sort of talk about these evoking questions, give some sample evoking questions, and then put people in small groups of 3, and what I call mini discernment groups, in which say each person has 15 minutes. So in a group of 3, with each person having 15 minutes, it's a 45-minute group, which is a significant bit of time. But in those 15 minutes, the person will have like 5 minutes to share something they're discerning about or something that's up in their spiritual life at the moment. And then the next 5 minutes, the other 2 people will ask questions, evoking questions, like, how is God working with you in this? Or do you have any intuitions or dreams that are guiding you in this? Or is there some image or scripture passage that comes to your mind in relation to this? So questions that help them access that heart knowing. So for 5 minutes, the 2 people just gently ask questions, and online it's really helpful to write those questions in the chat. So there's a record of them. A person can save the chat file at the end and have a record of it. And then for the last 5 minutes of that person's focus, they get to answer one of the questions. They get to choose which question they want to answer. So it's only 15 minutes to be the focus of the group. You leave with several questions that you can ponder later. But you also have this, I know when I've been the focus of that, these questions are evocative and have really helped me with discernment, even though it's only 15 minutes in the center of the focus. So each person would have their 15 minutes in a 45-minute period. That's another one of my favorite exercises to do. And usually people feel like something meaningful has happened in that time. They've gotten some assistance, or some question is left, or some answer they gave really helped clarify something.
Mm.
The kinds of exercises I'm talking about, like the repeating question and this mini discernment group, it takes a certain amount of time to set them up, teach the skills that you're going to use, to explain them. But I find it's really worth it in terms of the exercises helping to take people to a deeper place. You know, there is a value to asking a query and then having everybody have a chance to share about that. That can be a really deepening experience. But to go sort of to the next level, it sometimes I find it a certain amount of setup can really help individuals and small groups go to a deeper place together. It requires a certain amount of effort on the part of the facilitator or the tech host, you know, to keep sending those reminders, like in those discernment trios. And if I've got, you know, a number of different groups doing it at the same time, you know, every 5 minutes I say, okay, move to the next step, the next step. So for a group of 3, that's 9 steps over the 45 minutes. And the facilitator, the tech host has to be, or the facilitator has to keep sending those reminders. So it's a certain amount, it's a labor of love, but I find it really, really can be helpful for people to do those kinds of deepening exercises. Deb, I wonder if you have something you want to share about what has been in your experience online, what has helped people to explore spiritual deepening.
Actually, that's why I came to this workshop, because it's not something that I have made an effort to focus on. So I'm wide open and waiting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can share another kind of experience that I've had recently that I found valuable. And these were the worship experiments that were sponsored by Philadelphia Yearly Meeting on Wednesday evenings for 10 weeks, from the beginning of February till the middle of April. And so they invited 10 different people to come. And these worship experiments lasted only an hour. They were facilitated by a staff member from Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, Zachary Dutton, who may have also sort of created this. So for the first 10 minutes, somebody was invited to share with the group what they do to prepare for meeting for worship and what happens for them, or what they do during a meeting for worship. And then maybe what comes out of it for them. So your invited person has 10 minutes to share this. And then the group will spend half an hour in worship together online, sort of trying out the methods or the practices that the person has shared. And then there's 15 minutes at the end for people to share what that experience was like, or what out of what the facilitator shared really was something new for them and was a rewarding experience. And I attended 6 of those, so 6 different people. I was one of them. But all very different. People have very different ways of preparing for worship and entering into meeting for worship, of what they do when sort of they get distracted and come back and meeting for worship. And it was really, it was very valuable. So that's an example in just a single hour of a little bit of presentation, and then a group experience together, and then reflection on the experience. And I find those 3 elements are really helpful for spiritual deepening. Somebody's having thoughts.
I think I'm really intrigued with doing more directed. I have been leading a seekers group, only it's been this same about 15 people who come and go. For 7 years, we've been meeting every month, and then once we were on Zoom, it was every 2 weeks, and then every week. And we don't have any direction. It mostly is we just have worship, and then people do these really heart-to-heart check-ins on where they are and kind of how, what's going on in their life that is challenging them spiritually. I think it would be interesting to throw some of this at them and say, hey, you guys want to experiment for 3 months, and let's just and if somebody shows up with something they really need to, we'll bail.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The other thing I can share is that the high school program and the junior high program of New England have been experimenting with Three Rivers Worship Group, David Coletta and Lisa Graustein, Christina Keith Perry, and some others on this thing called Worship Pizza. So they come for a time before and kind of brainstorm what kind of things help them youth settle. It's praying in color, or it's doing yoga, or it's whatever. And then choosing a few of those. And then the next time gathering in worship and having those breakout rooms available so that then people can go between them for an hour. So they're kind of choosing how they want to be. And one of them is unprogrammed worship, right? And that has proven to be really helpful for youth as a way of owning how to try and get somewhere deeper than where they are staring at a screen.
Mm-hmm. What's the name of this again?
We've been calling it Worship Pizza. It's like you take the whole and you just do a slice, right? And so for this time, we're going to do this, and you can have this piece if you want, but if you want yours with green peppers on it, you can have that piece, and kind of you've got toppings to choose from.
So are there all variations on worship, or what worshipful activities?
Mm-hmm. 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 Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. So here's another deepening exercise that I've learned in my explorations. It sort of has two parts. One of them is for each person in a small group at the end of some experience together to say, what I'm experiencing right now is, and then to name it, to hear from everybody. And then in the next round, it's what we are experiencing right now. And this is trying to name sort of what's happening in the group. So I'll start with, what am I experiencing right now? What I'm experiencing right now is a sense of my heart being touched. So I am feeling some kind of deepening happening in this group from the experiences that have been shared. So I invite anyone else to just jump in and say, what I'm experiencing right now is.
what I'm experiencing right now is taking notes and thinking, okay, how can I use this in my meeting on Sunday? How can I to go deeper? It's different than worship sharing. So.
Experiencing a quieting and a listening.
Just one of those exercises that I find can come out in some interesting places. There are several of you around a circle or whatever. And the first person says, "Be still and know that I am God." Let that sit. And then another person says the same sentence, but drops the last word. And you just gradually do that going around. And you find yourself in interesting places with that.
Yeah, I've done that in certain situations too. So, get down to be still and then just be. That's beautiful. Does anybody else want to say what you're experiencing right now? It's a difficult question because to say what you're experiencing requires you to let your heart be exposed. And we protect ourselves from the vulnerability of our hearts by going into our thoughts. I mean, it's so culturally programmed into us that it can feel risky to invite people to say, well, what are you experiencing right now? And it can feel risky to feel it. What am I experiencing right now? And then to share it. So I thought we were at a place where I could take the risk to ask this group, and I thank you for your responses. I don't know that we're ready to go into the next piece, which is what are we experiencing right now? Although I might say I'm feeling there's some of that tenderness and vulnerability around these questions, but also some openness to the group. Also, that's what I'm feeling. anyone else wants to name your sense of what we are feeling, I invite you.
I'm feeling some tentative, that we are feeling some tentative closeness and connection.
In a way, this is what the clerk of a business meeting has to do. Get the sense of the meeting. What are we sensing? And it's a deeply spiritual process, and it's a vulnerable one. And I just want to, we're just have a minute or two left. I just want to thank each of you for showing up at this roundtable and sharing your experience. And it's been very valuable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm. Mhm.
I'm going to stop the recording now.